Hey, and welcome back to episode 13 of the HigherUp podcast. I'm your host, Michael Smoke. I'm happy to have you here. Today, I'm going to be talking about 7 simple ways to sleep better and deeper and more restfully, backed by science. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the ideal morning routine and how those things in the morning routine can set you up for a great night's sleep. Sleep is one of, if not the most important pillar of our health, and yet so many people in today's society compromise on it. But the people who tend to compromise on it tend to live shorter, less happy lives. People who sleep more tend to do a little bit better in the long run. So I'm going to give you some science-backed tips on how to sleep better starting first thing in the morning, as well as talk a little bit about my morning routine and how it sets you up for a great night's sleep. Now, before we get into the meat of the episode, I do want to quickly say I have launched a community. It's called the HigherUp Lifestyle. The link to join will be in the YouTube or Spotify description. I wanted to create a place for like-minded people to gather, congregate, collaborate, bounce ideas off each other, and also have the opportunity to build a deeper, more meaningful relationship with some of you who listen to me yap into this camera. I go live in that community once a week just for them. I also share weekly video series that I call playbooks on various topics of health, fitness, nutrition, and mindset practices. So if you're interested, the link is in the bio. I'd love to see you there. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. But before that, this episode is brought to you by LaCroix. No, I'm just kidding. Like I said in an early episode, I'm manifesting it. LaCroix will be a sponsor of this podcast one day because sometimes you just need a mildly flavored bubbly water for no good reason. Tip number 1, it starts as soon as you open your eyes with morning sunlight. I've talked a lot about the benefits of morning sunlight and I post about it frequently, and people who have told me they've implemented this habit have noticed a change in their energy levels. But I don't think I've gotten deep into the why behind why this is so important. There are thousands of data that support how powerful morning sunlight is for wakefulness in the mornings, for natural cortisol level rises. Now, the meat and potatoes of it is just that photons in the early sun, the low level sunlight, when they hit our eyes, promote wakefulness and basically tell our body it's daytime, do the daytime things. We are diurnal creatures. We rise with the sun, we fall with the moon, and before modern society and artificial lighting, we did just that. But now, obviously, we have artificial lights. It's harder to stay awake it's harder to go to sleep and stay awake at normal hours. But traditionally, over the course of human history, this is how we woke and went to bed. And that's probably why you've noticed you sleep so damn well when you go camping, because you've got the sun and the moon and not a lot of access to your phone or artificial light. By the end of the day, you're just ready to conk out. So the photons in morning sunlight promote wakefulness. They naturally raise our cortisol levels, which is good. We want cortisol to rise slowly and naturally throughout the first 3 to 5 hours of the day. That is good. Cortisol has its place. It's not the enemy. I don't care what your favorite guru said. It is a critical neurotransmitter to our body, brain, and well-being. So this will allow cortisol levels to rise naturally, and you will feel 180 degrees better if you get out in clear sunlight between 5 and 10 minutes within an hour of waking, preferably as soon as possible. Now, follow-up questions I've received to this, but Michael, what if I wake up before the sun? Okay, you can do the other steps that I'm going to detail here in just a moment, but turn on all the artificial lights in your home. Now, you won't get the same photon exposure that you would from sun. So the easiest tip is do the other things I'm going to get into and walk around in the artificial light. And when the sun rises, go spend 5 minutes outside letting it hit your face. You do not need to let the sunlight hit your eyes directly. That is not required on a clear, sunny day. Just being outside in it without sunglasses is plenty. On an overcast day, it might behoove you to look up at the sky. The sun is still there for you folks who have said, but I live somewhere where it's cloudy, I can't get sunlight. It's bright outside. Even when it's overcast, you can see that is the sun doing its job. So you can still get a lot of those early light photons, early AM light photons in your eyes. What this is going to do outside of raising your cortisol levels and telling your body and brain that it's daytime, do the daytime things, it's going to start your digestion. It's going to wake you up. It's also going to trigger a subsequent melatonin release 12 to 14 hours later. So if you get out in that sun at 7 a.m., at 8:30 p.m., you are going to notice a natural sleepiness, and that is a melatonin release. That is your body's diurnal sleeping and waking patterns being as they should, the way that nature and the good Lord intended. So, absolutely critical to get your morning sunlight. If you wake up before the sun, just find time to get out in it and put on artificial lights until the sun rises. Number 2 is going to be physical activity and cold exposure with a unified theme of raising core body temperature. Now, physiologically speaking, your core body temperature should sort of work like a bell curve. For those of you just listening, I'm illustrating a bell curve with my hand. It should be lowest at 1 to 3 a.m. and it should start to slowly rise as you get closer to sunrise, and that's what causes you to naturally wake up. As our core body temperature increases, our cortisol levels start to increase, and wakefulness is directly associated with a higher core body temperature. That's why it's so hard to go to sleep with a high body temperature. That we'll get into that later. The point is, what you want to do is start to get your core body temperature to climb as quickly as possible if you want to be awake as early in the day as you need to be. And then that will naturally cause the core body temperature as the day goes on, as we get closer to the evening, core body temperature to fall, letting you sleep better that night. I'll get into that in just a moment. So what you want to do this is twofold, or one or the other. You can perform some light physical activity and get your heart rate up. That's going to elevate your core body temperature. And you can, and you get the point, both. You can also practice cold exposure, 1 to 3 minutes in an ice bath or shower as cold as you can comfortably and safely stand it. Now you may be thinking, but Michael, cold water should plummet my core body temperature. Yes, if you stay in the cold water long enough, that's where hypothermia comes from. But if you just spend enough time in there to cool the body off and trigger a couple of things that are going to lead to wakefulness. One, cold water is going to let your adrenaline and dopamine and epinephrine shoot up, which is going to immediately wake you up within 60 seconds. But your body has what's called sort of a super compensatory effect. When you get it into really cold water, it becomes frigid. It compensates by heating you up internally to keep you alive, to keep you safe, right? Of course, spending a minute in cold water isn't going to kill you. So when you hop out, your body will say, all right, let's warm them up. Core body temperature will elevate. You will feel more awake. You'll feel more alert. Adrenaline, epinephrine, and dopamine will climb, and you will feel amazing. I've been doing it every day for 375 days now. And as a result, as the day goes on, your core body temperature will start to fall, leading you into that organic, natural, deep, restful sleep. So manipulating core body temperature with tools is absolutely critical. And it's important that we get our core body temperature up as early as we can in the day after waking, so it will naturally fall as we get into the evening. Now, I know some of you prefer to carry out your exercise like me in the afternoon or even evenings. Maybe that's what your schedule permits. Don't let this fear monger you into skipping your workouts. If the only time you can train is in the evening, and sure, that's going to release some cortisol, it's going to raise your core body temperature, that's okay. The best time of day you can work out is the time of day you can do it. And for some people's schedules, it's nighttime. What I suggest is a few minutes of light activity in the morning, if not your gym workout, just to get the heart rate up, get the blood flowing, and raise core body temperature. For me, it's a 10 to 15 minute brisk walk in the morning sun, maybe paired with a few burpees or a few push-ups, just to accelerate the heart rate, not to get a workout in. So that's step number 2. Number 3 is going to be your meal timing. Now, as I said earlier, the morning sun triggers our body clock and tells our body and brain it's daytime thing, do the daytime things. Everything that we do to a degree has an impact on our circadian clock. And one of the most powerful tools we can implement to impact our circadian rhythm is food. Because when we are digesting food, it's hard for us to slip into a deep sleep or restful state. And there seems to be a correlation with alertness and wakefulness for people who eat food earlier in the day. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Michael, I intermittent fast. I wait till late in the day to eat. That works too. If that's what works for you and you feel good and you're losing body fat and building muscle, pushing your food off later in the day, that's okay. Now, I will say I'm a big intermittent faster. I've done it every day for 8 years now. I don't like eating early in the morning. It's just not fun for me. I feel dull and slow and just hungrier throughout the day when I do it. However, I have pushed my fasting window up a little bit to where I probably will eat at more like 10:30 or 11 a.m. and probably stop eating between 6:30 and 8 p.m. at the latest. And that's not to keep myself confined to a tight window for calories or fat loss. I'll get into why that's important in just a second. But typically, the earlier you can stop eating or giving yourself a bigger buffer before bed, the more likely you are to get deeper, more restful sleep. It's very hard for the body and brain to release melatonin and to slip into a deep, deep restful state when you're digesting food for a couple of reasons. When you eat, your body's going to pull bile and digestive fluids and blood into the digestive tract instead of in the brain and in the extremities where it can relax you and slow things down a little bit. You're also going to get an increase in core body temperature when you're digesting food, which means you might be hot in bed. So it's important that you give yourself a couple of hours before bed for restful sleep and you're between bed and your last meal. Now, there is a myth that people have constituted where if you eat too close to bed, you gain fat. That is not true. When I was shredded, I was eating my last meal at 10 p.m. and I continued to lose weight. What matters is your total daily calorie intake there. You guys should know this at this point. But for ideal sleep, it would behoove you to give yourself at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before bed, before you get into bed to try to slip off into sleep and your last meal. Lately, I've been getting into bed about 11, so I have my last meal at 8 or 8:15 at the latest. And I had noticed on my Whoop that I'm getting more REM sleep, and my HRV, heart rate variability, is actually a little bit higher. So if you're struggling to sleep and cool off at night and you're having dinner at 9:30, 10 o'clock and going to bed at 11, try to push that back a little bit. Try to have your first meal an hour and a half earlier and your last meal an hour and a half earlier, because it will ultimately lead to better sleep. This is well rooted in peer-reviewed research. Tip number 4, caffeine, everybody's favorite drug. And yes, it is a drug, my friends. So caffeine delay and cutoff are both important. Number 1, it's important to understand how caffeine works, which I'll explain after I take a sip of LaCroix. That's nice. Understanding how caffeine works in our body mechanistically will maybe help you understand or appreciate why you need to be careful with it. Caffeine is what's called an adenosine antagonist, meaning it works against adenosine to reduce sleepiness. All day, every day, throughout the day, from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, this molecule called adenosine builds in our brain. It accumulates the longer that we're awake. So if you wake up at 6, you go to bed at 10, you have a lot of adenosine over that, 16 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. That adenosine builds and builds and builds, and what Matthew Walker calls sleep pressure starts to accumulate. And when we get closer to that time where melatonin is released, that adenosine sort of releases. Once it releases in the brain, it travels to the adenosine receptor, where it binds onto the adenosine receptor, triggering that initial sleep process catalyst. So feelings of sleepiness, the urge to go to bed, get off your phone, put things down, and shut your eyes. That starts with adenosine. Now, caffeine molecularly is similar to adenosine. So similar, in fact, that the way that caffeine works is it binds to our adenosine receptors, blocking adenosine from hitting that receptor. So it can't bind and make you sleepy. Now, when we wake up, if we didn't get a full restful night's sleep or complete all our sleep cycles, or even if we did sometimes, we'll have a little bit of adenosine built up, still floating around in our brains, and it will take generally 60 to 120 minutes to dissipate. What's important is that you let that adenosine dissipate by delaying caffeine, let it all clear out, and that'll associate you with a feeling of more wakefulness and alertness, albeit maybe not for the first hour or two you're awake. So don't have caffeine for the first 1 to 2 hours you're awake to allow your adenosine to clear out. And then you can have the caffeine and you're going to notice a couple of things. One, it's going to hit a little bit harder. At least I've noticed I feel the caffeine effects more when I delay it. So at this point, you should have done your morning sunlight, your morning walk or activity. You should have had at least a liter of water with electrolytes. That's, of course, part of my morning routine. Morning salt water, though not in here. Have water with electrolytes before caffeine, because caffeine is a diuretic and it dehydrates you and you lose electrolytes when you drink it. And by this point, you should have been awake for an hour, hour and a half. Stay busy. I know it's a tough hour and a half wait because you want to reach for that coffee, but you will notice it hits harder. You will also notice you do not suffer from that afternoon crash, because what happens when we have caffeine early in the day and quickly, we create an artificial spike in cortisol rather than the natural one that sunlight, I told you, and movement trigger and cold exposure trigger. We create an artificial massive spike in cortisol, which leads to a subsequent fall in cortisol, which is what leads to that afternoon crash, which also causes people, and this is what I'm getting to now as to how it correlates to proper sleep, to reach for that 2, 3, 4, 5 p.m. cup of coffee. Now, here's where that's absolutely detrimental for your sleep. I told you that caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. Caffeine also has a half-life, as it's antagonizing your damn adenosine, of 4 to 8 hours. Now, we have a metabolite in our livers that genetically is different for people, and it is responsible for the metabolism and breakdown of caffeine. But generally speaking, it takes everybody 4 to 8 hours to metabolize half the dosage of caffeine. So if you have 100 milligrams of caffeine, roughly a cup of coffee at 10 a.m., 4 to 8 hours later, you have half of that dose in your bloodstream. So 50. 4 to 8 hours later, you have another half, 25. But some of you will have caffeine in the morning and then go reach for your 300 milligram bucked up pre-workout at 4:30, or have an espresso because you're tired at the office, and have 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine at 5, and then wonder why you're sleeping like shit or can't get restful at night. It's because that caffeine is still very much bound up in your brain, keeping you awake. Now, for those of you out there listening who are saying out loud in your car right now, oh, but Michael, I can have an espresso at 8 and go right to sleep. Ugh, I hate when people say that. Sorry if that's one of you, because you're wrong. You may be able to go to sleep, but there is now some solid data that shows whether or not you're able to sleep, the architecture and integrity of your sleep is much lower when you have caffeine to that degree in your bloodstream that late in the day. So you're probably suppressing your REM sleep and your deep sleep. And though you may be sleeping 8 hours, you're not waking up feeling rested, which is causing you to repeat the overcaffeination cycle again. So in short, you should give yourself at least, in my opinion, 6 hours on the absolute bare minimum, preferably 8 to 10 hours between your last hit of caffeine and bedtime. So if you want to have that pre-workout, I recommend buying a no-stim pre-workout or maybe just having salt water. For many years, I just had 1,000 milligrams of sodium and water before my evening workouts, and I felt energized. I felt great. That's going to raise blood pressure, boost blood volume, increase force output. It's going to give you energy, but stay away from the stimulants at least 6 to 8 hours before you get into bed. I promise your brain will thank you. And that's caffeine. Number 5, evening sunlight. Obviously, the sun is a big contributor to how and why we sleep. So we've talked about AM sunlight. Evening sunlight works similarly. The photons in the evening sun solidify and amplify our sleeping and waking patterns. It's also going to increase serotonin production, which is associated with restfulness. So it's important to get evening sunlight, just like AM sunlight, 10 to 15 minutes. Go watch the sunset. Go for a walk with your loved ones. And you also just get to see sunsets, which is beautiful. It's a lot of fun. I love sunrises and sunsets. Something about it triggers something primal in me as a human that I just like, I want to get out in the woods. So view your sunsets because it's going to increase serotonin, which is going to make you feel good, relaxed, but also solidify your sleeping patterns. So by now, you've gotten morning sunlight, you've delayed caffeine, you've done some cold exposure, some light activity, and you're in sunset. You got 15 minutes of sunset on your eyes. You are ready to sleep like a brick. So let's talk a little bit about setting up for the actual evening itself. We get 2 to 3 hours out from bed. Now what? The next thing you can do to positively impact your sleep is get really, really hot. Now, I know what you're thinking. Michael, you just said if I get hot, I sleep like hell. And I do. I notice that I have to sleep with one leg out of the bed, out of the blankets, and I'm tired and I can't go to sleep because I'm so hot. 2 to 3 hours before bed, get hot. You can do this a couple of different ways. Sauna or a hot bath, if that's all you have access to, they have similar effects. Now, why am I preaching you need to get hot to sleep better to get cold? Remember the super compensatory effect I mentioned earlier the body has? The body's always looking out for us. It's always fighting for us. When we get cold, it compensates by heating us up. When we get very hot, it compensates by cooling us down because it's always trying to keep us alive. When we apply that stress, it tries to bring us back to homeostasis or baseline. So when you get in a sauna for 20 to 40 minutes or a hot bath for 20 to 40 minutes, hot enough to where you are breaking a sweat, your body will respond by lowering your core body temperature. Now, why is that so important? Because in order for our body and brains to release melatonin, our core body temperature actually needs to fall between 1 and 3 degrees, depending on the person. So if you want to sleep better at night, you need to get hot so your body will cool itself down. Anecdotally, though there's research to back it, I have been making sure to sauna before bed a few times a week, and my REM sleep is crazy high on my Whoop when I make sure to get really, really sweaty before bed. Now, that's not from exercise. That's strictly from slipping into a deep sweat in a rested, seated, relaxed state, and then giving your body a couple of hours to initiate that super compensatory effect. So try to get, if you have access to a sauna, great. Try to get hot in there, 20 to 40 minutes. If you only have access to a hot bath, that will also work and have a similar effect, or hot tub or jacuzzi, what have you. I ain't above taking a bath. That's all I have access to. If it means I'm asleep deeper, I am not above that. Baths ain't just for kids. Baths are for biohackers. That's a new hashtag, biohackers for baths. So get hot in the evening because your core body temperature will decrease and melatonin will be released. And that is what we want. Now, you've executed the perfect day to set you up for a great night's sleep. So now let's talk about supplementation. I am only going to speak to supplements that I have actually personally taken and how they work and why they help and if I've thought that they've helped. So supplementation for sleep. First and foremost is going to be magnesium. If you follow me, you know how I feel about magnesium. Most people just simply don't get enough because you're not eating the right foods, and our food is much less nutrient dense than it used to be per the soil that we farm from. If you listen to my last episode with Jordan Parker, he talks about how on average, food is 30% less nutrient dense than it was about 50 years ago when our grandparents ate it. So I highly recommend a magnesium supplement, either a magnesium threonate or a magnesium glycinate. Try both, see which one you like more. I personally prefer threonate. It seems to have more cognition benefits than glycinate, or at least more observed, because it more easily crosses the blood-brain barrier and is reduced with risk of cognitive decline, and I'm very passionate about brain health. But both are fantastic. Glycinate seems to be more specifically helping with sleep for most people, but I feel great taking either one. So try both, see which one you prefer, and pick one. So the reason that magnesium works so well within our brains and bodies is that it helps with the production of gamma and butyric acid, I believe, which is a precursor to melatonin, and magnesium and melatonin levels in the body are directly correlated. So it seems that when magnesium levels are elevated, melatonin levels seem to elevate as well. Natural melatonin, not exogenous supplements. So take your magnesium in the evening for a better night's sleep. The next supplement that I have tried before, this is straight out of the Huberman Lab cocktail, apigenin with L-theanine. Apigenin is the concentrated derivative form of the relaxation compound in chamomile tea, which is obviously very common in wives' tales, and you've all heard it for making us feel sleepy and relaxed. Apigenin does, in fact, do that. It helps slip the brain into a more restful, slower neuron firing state. And then you have L-theanine. I paired these two together because my supplement that I have is apigenin with 200 milligrams of L-theanine, 50 milligrams apigenin, 200 milligrams L-theanine. And L-theanine is an amino acid that, when crossing the blood-brain barrier, promotes the production of what's called alpha brainwave state, which is a state our brain is constantly emitting waves and frequencies. This is a crazy little thing. We don't really know shit about it. What we do know is when we take L-theanine, we slip into an alpha brainwave state, which is associated with a state of calmness or relaxation. So supplementing L-theanine is great. I also, sidebar, if you get caffeine jitters but you like caffeine, pairing caffeine with L-theanine takes that jitter away and creates a very smooth buzz. You'll see a lot of pre-workouts now contain L-theanine almost in a 1-to-1 dosage with caffeine. Love that nootropic combo. The next one is inositol, which is an amino acid that seems to be a precursor to healthy serotonin levels in the brain. As I mentioned earlier, serotonin is a precursor to relaxation, sense of well-being, ultimately helping us drift off into sleepy land. So inositol is something I've used and do enjoy. And you don't have to take all of these. You don't have to go buy all of these. I will say the EchoVision EchoZ's supplements, the capsules and the powder, contain pretty much all of what I'm going to share with you in one supplement. So if you want to go try it, code HU for a discount. Really are incredible supplements. They're clinically effective dosages and contain pretty much every observed sleep compound that we've seen in research to promote deep, restful sleep. So inositol is fantastic. The next one is a little bit unusual and I think less talked about, and it's rutacarpine. Rutacarpine is a really interesting molecule that seems to be able to bind to caffeine and allow us to metabolize it and flush it more quickly. It's sort of, if you have caffeine bound to adenosine, it can sort of come in and grab the caffeine and pull it off of the adenosine receptor and allow us to metabolize it more quickly so that adenosine can get in there and do its job. So if you did slip up and you had caffeine late in the day, I will say I've done that, and rutacarpine really does seem to help. You can buy a rutacarpine supplement. That's what I have done. I also know there happens to be a sleep powder called Kino Sleep, made by Greg O'Gallagher, Kino Body, that has rutacarpine in it for this very reason. But let's go ahead and not have caffeine late in the day. And if you don't, rutacarpine won't serve much of a purpose for you. Melatonin. This is a hot one. People think that if you take it exogenously, will it shut off my body's ability to make melatonin naturally? Is it bad for me because it's a hormone? Is it like test? Am I screwed if I take melatonin for life? There's not a ton of research on this, but what I can say is one study was done where they absolutely mega dosed subjects with, I think, 50 milligrams of melatonin a night for 7 days. The day they came off of it, they noticed melatonin release still occurred naturally. Am I going to tell you to base your life off that? No, I'm not a doctor. I'm not making recommendations. I will say that I sometimes take melatonin exogenously, and I have since I was a kid, and it seems to help on nights I'm really struggling to slip off into restful sleep. It can also be particularly helpful if you're traveling to different time zones and you need to adjust your brain from East Coast to West Coast or East Coast to Mountain Time or vice versa. You can take the melatonin exogenously to trigger an alignment of your sleeping and waking cycles in the new time zone. The last one is GABA, or gamma ambutyric acid. I've supplemented with this before, and it basically works by slowing down the firing of neurons, or the excitatory neurons in our brain, quite literally slowing our brain down to slip into a more relaxed, restful state. Now, that was 6 supplements. I just threw a lot at you: magnesium, apigenin, L-theanine, inositol, rutacarpine, melatonin, and GABA. I've taken all of them. I've taken all of them separately. I've taken all of them together in separate supplements. And I've taken all of them combined into Echo Z's powder or pill. The powder and pill are slightly different formulas. I've taken both at the same time. Love it. But I love toying around with supplementation for my sleep. So I recommend picking a few of these. If I had to recommend two to start with, it would probably be magnesium and the apigenin plus L-theanine supplement. And if you do all of these 7 things, as well as that morning routine I talked about, you will set yourself up for a better night's sleep. You will notice 180 degrees difference in your energy levels early in the day, your productivity, your focus, and by that, sleep at night as well as a byproduct. I've been doing all of these things for about a year now, and I will simply never go back. The morning routine itself doesn't take more than 15 to 20 minutes. It's all simple, cost-effective things that you can do, free for the most part, actually, and it makes a massive difference. So sometimes we're just a few key, simple decisions away every single day from feeling 180 degrees better and different. So please, if you have things that you like to do in your sleep or wakeful patterns that help you sleep better at night, I'd love to hear you drop a comment and give me your feedback or anything you would have added to this episode. But thank you for listening. I hope you got something good out of it. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Spotify, thanks for listening. Please rate the podcast and give me a follow. It really does help me out. It isn't easy, but it is simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Everybody have a great week.